Welcome back. So we've gone through the first step, but let's look at the second step now with CSS. CSS is called render blocking because in order to construct the render tree, remember this one over here, and print something onto the screen, we're waiting for the CSS DOM to complete and combine it with the DOM to create the render tree. So CSS is render blocking. So with that in mind, it makes sense that we want to make them as lightweight as possible so that the user sees something as soon as possible. And with the CSS over here, there's just a few things that we need to consider. We want to only load whatever is needed. We want to possibly incorporate above the fold loading. We want to add media attributes, and we want to get less specificity to improve performance. Let's get into that one by one to show you what I mean. We have our super awesome example that we used last time as well. This time we've added the CSS optimizing techniques that we've just discussed. The first one, load only what is needed, is pretty self-explanatory, right? CSS is really easy to just keep adding stuff to. We can add more styles, maybe copy some styles that we saw online and paste them on here, and you can make this file hundreds if not thousands of lines long. But by only loading what is actually needed and preventing the file from being bloated, you avoid more download time, right? If we go back to our example, lucky for us, we only have one style sheet that is so small that it says it's 0 bytes right now. It takes 1 millisecond to download. That's pretty nice. So the first one is nice and easy. Just load what you need. Now the second point, above the fold loading. And this is pretty interesting. If I'm a user right now and I refresh the page, I'm only interested in what I can see. If this web page was scrollable, maybe we had images underneath, or it was one of those one-page websites that I can keep scrolling down on, there's more and more information. I technically don't need to see that until I start scrolling. So the priority is to see whatever is above the fold, the main page. If we're able to optimize this and just load what we need above the fold, that'd be pretty nice, wouldn't it? Maybe we only need the CSS that we're using right now above the fold. Let me show you how to do that. So let's say we have this style 3. And this style 3 is a CSS file, but we don't really need it for the main page of our website. So in here, let's just create a h2 class. And this h2 class, we'll call it, this is important. And within here, we'll just load up a piece of text that says important above the fold content. And we can just copy this again and say that we also have another h2 tag, and this one we'll just say it's secondary. And this one's not important. It is below the fold content. You won't see this until after page loads. And let's say that important and secondary each have their own style classes. You can see that in style.css, I have the important class that has background yellow. And in style3.css, I have secondary with background pink. Now, these style files are pretty small, but you can imagine how they would work if our app was bigger. But right now, if I load this onto my web page and I refresh, all right, well, I'm not getting the styles because, well, I need to add the style files. And I also misspelled important. Silly me. Let's refresh. All right, so the first CSS is working, the second one isn't because we need to import it. So again, let's add a new style file. 3. If I refresh here, all right, everything is being loaded. But as you can see here in our network tab, we get a nice little hint. If you look at the red line over here, it says load is 9 milliseconds. So that means our website was loaded in 9 milliseconds, pretty fast. But both style sheets were loaded before we saw anything. But if this was like this and the pink background is unnecessary because as a user, I'm only going to see this first content, let's see if we can move the style 3 to be loaded after the load line, the red line. With a little JavaScript, this is actually quite simple, and you can even grab this script online. Don't stress too much about it if you don't fully get it. But again, using a script tag, we can just incorporate this fairly easily. We'll simply have a const load style sheet, and that will accept a parameter of source. And we'll say if document.create style sheet, and we just want to make sure that this property or this method actually exists. If that's the case, because some browsers have this, we can just say create style sheet and give it the path. Otherwise, we can just do this ourselves. We can say style sheet equals document.create element, and we're going to create a link tag. And this link tag will have an href that is equals to the path, the source. We'll also give it a type of text CSS, again, just like we have it up here. Style sheet.type. And then finally, we can just say document.get element by ID, or let's do by tag name. And we'll just grab the head tag. And because it returns an array, we have to get the array element. So this grabs our head tag in the HTML. And to it, we're simply going to append child, the style sheet we just created. And we don't need the quotes. Perfect. So that's going to create the style sheet. So we don't need to actually import it here anymore, style 3. And now with our style sheet loaded, or a function that loads our style sheet, we can now incorporate it into something called window.onload. So that is when it loads, remember that red line, when window.load, we can simply run the function, and we'll just console log here just to see that it's working. We'll say window done. And with here, we can just do our load style sheet with the file path that we're going to give it, which is going to be, style3.css. All right, let's save this, see if we've made any mistakes. I'm going to refresh. And I see I get an error. And create element I cannot spell. Let's fix that. Create element. Save. Let's try that again. And get element by tag name, because it should be get elements by tag name. I do this all the time. There you go. Let's refresh. All right. We see that below the fold content, and we're not getting any error, but we're not getting the pink background here. And we also actually need a style sheet dot rel, which will be style sheet. So now if we go and refresh, did you see that at the bottom? If I refresh again, we see that index and style are being loaded before the window onload event, so loading of the web page, and then style 3 is being loaded afterwards. And if I scroll down, there you go. There's my pink background from my style3.css. Let's close this, and we'll just do a hard reload. And you see that blink? Because the style is being loaded after the web page. So after it's being displayed, then the styles get loaded versus the yellow that is always there from the very, there you go. Very cool. So we just did above the fold loading. Now, there are two more things, and they're a lot quicker to demonstrate. Media attributes, well, you've done this before. We showed you how to do media attributes with @media in your CSS files, but you can actually do them in your HTML files as well. So let's say, for example, you had some media that you only need for certain screen sizes. Well, in that case, let's just copy all of this. And we'll say media, which, by the way, this is default. If you don't put anything in a link tag, it'll assume that media equals to all. But in our case, let's say that our style2.css, this one will have a media only screen. I don't need the media here. There you go. So it's only screen. So for any screen, and we'll say and min width is going to be 500 pixels. So if I do this and save, and we'll see that style 2 has a H1 color of red. If I go back here and I refresh, we'll see that the H1 that says hi is red. Let's change this back to how fast. Let's refresh. And if I scroll this in closer, we see that it's green now. And you also notice at the bottom that we have all three style sheets. Very cool. And then the final thing is less specificity. And this is a very minor one, but minor one to just keep in mind. That is, if we go to style 2 over here, we have a good and a bad. Now, why would this be the case? Because remember, browsers are computers that need to do work. First of all, the more information we sent over the wire, the more bytes that is. This is way less characters than this one. But also, when it arrives in the browser needs to calculate the styling to create that CSS DOM, right? So it needs to do a little bit more work if the specificity is really, really complicated versus if it's just like this. So again, a small one, but critical to understanding how rendering works in the browser. Okay, I lied. There's one last thing I want to point out. When we say load only what is needed, some of you might be thinking there's a trick we can do. Perhaps instead of loading an external style sheet, we can just create an internal one. One that is a style tag. And the style tag, within here, we can just put all our CSS. For example, if I wanted the H1 to have a certain style, let's say font style of 30 pixels, and actually just to make it something clearer, we can just say that, we'll just say that color is blue. I'll save and refresh. And we see over here that, yeah, we're able to change the style, but we're not loading any new style sheets. So theoretically, we can just put all the styles in here and in here. Just take all that out and put them within this block. And that's really good. We're avoiding that one extra request. However, you might notice an issue here. If we had multiple HTML pages, well, we'll have to copy and paste this into other pages. So this is only working on one HTML page. And this is actually a good thing to do if you're doing above the fold loading with an internal CSS just for the above the fold CSS. That's a good trick to do. Another option is to have something called inline CSS. An inline CSS, again, is a style attribute this time. And we can say that this style has a background, let's do color of yellow. If I save and refresh, again, nothing new. We have our background yellow, but with no new style sheets. And once again, this is pretty great. And the browser is able to read this really, really fast and apply the style quite fast. But again, the limitation of this is the fact that we have to do it for every single element, and we can't really have classes or IDs for it. But strategically, if you use these, you are able to make your website faster, depending on your situation. All right, that's it for now. To review, we've learned that with CSS, we want to only load whatever is needed. We want to consider above the fold loading. We want to work with media attributes to make sure we render specific to screen sizes. And we also might want to consider less specificity when it comes to our CSS. All right, that's enough for now. I'll see you in the next video where we talk about JavaScript. Bye-bye.